Be seated. One of my now many-year Christmas Advent traditions is that during the Advent season leading up to Christmas, I spend time in some Christmas books. And one of those stories comes to life as the core of my sermon or message on Christmas Day. So it's a different pace from what I do the night before. It draws me and it becomes a spiritual preparation for me. And this year I'm going to share some excerpts from the book The Christmas Bus by Melody Carson. And if anybody wants to borrow it afterwards, you're certainly welcome to, because I won't be sharing the whole story. December 20th. "Where in the world are we?" asked Amy as she pulled the wool blanket she was using as a shawl a little tighter around her shoulders. She looked out the dirt-streaked passenger window, gazing at the bleak, brown, rolling hills all around them. "Like I told you," Colin pulled into the slow-moving vehicle lane to allow a short string of cars to pass. "We're in northern Oregon now. We'll be heading into the Cascade Mountains in a few minutes. I just hope we can make it over without too much trouble. Old Queenie almost bought the farm going over the Rockies." At the beginning of their cross-country trip, they had christened their revamped school bus the Queen Mary, but had since shortened it to Queenie. The name worked since the makeshift motorhome was as big as a ship and probably used just about as much fuel, too. Colin hadn't told Amy that they were almost out of money due to the recently inflated gas prices, or that he was worried about Queenie's transmission going out before they reached their final destination in San Diego. Amy and Colin pulled into the Colorado town of Christmas Valley. It was a town that had reinvented itself after the decline in logging in the 80s, after all of the environmental concerns with the wildlife in the area. They pulled into town and they stopped at Santa's Diner. They ordered and ate Blitzen burgers, but their plan had only been to spend the night. They would stay on the bus. There was snow coming and all. As they were sitting there eating, there came a tap on the shoulder. "Is that your bus outside?" "You'll have to move it. We've got rules in Christmas Valley against camping on the city streets." Truth be told, the folks of Christmas Valley really didn't like the kind of hippie colors that old Queenie, their bus-turned-camper, had been painted. The waitress stepped up a few minutes later. She pointed him to a bed and breakfast that was just outside of town. It was surprisingly called the Shepherd's Inn. After all, this was Christmas Valley. It was run by Edith Ryan. She was the wife of Reverend Charles Ryan, the pastor of the only church that was left in town, and it was right across the street from this old converted house that was now a bed and breakfast. The church was slowly shrinking as people moved away. Young folks would grow up and realize that there wasn't much of a life for them in their minds in Christmas Valley, and they moved away to bigger cities, fame and fortune. Edith had run this bed and breakfast for a number of years. But she had a tradition that she always kind of declined any reservations during the 2 weeks around Christmas so that she would have all of those rooms ready for all of their family when their children would come home for Christmas. This year, though, things were a little different. In fact, she had just learned that none of their 4 children would make it home for Christmas, and she hadn't figured out how to tell her husband that they would be alone this Christmas. Tamia and Alicia and the kids, they were stationed in Germany. It was just too far to travel to come home to Christmas Valley. Jack and Constance decided that this year they should spend Christmas with her parents. After all, they had been there at Christmas Valley the year before. Katie and her family really thought it was too far to come from Florida. Krista, the youngest, who was a teacher, had all of a sudden had the opportunity to travel with some of her other friends that were teachers, and they were going to spend Christmas in Hawaii. So, Edith and Charles would be home for Christmas. They would be all alone for Christmas, actually, and that's when she suddenly had a brainstorm. Why not open up the inn for the first time for Christmas? It would be better than sitting in that big house empty, alone. She went to her computer and she began typing this email to her webmaster. Dear Jared, I've just come up with a promotion idea that I'd like you to display on my website. That is, if you're not too busy, I want to announce that for the first time in the 17 years of its operation, the Shepherd's Inn will be open throughout the entire month of December. And that as a Christmas special, I'll be offering a 25% discount to all guests. Plus, all guests will be included in the Christmas activities at no additional cost, including the Christmas Eve party and Christmas dinner, and so on. Can you please take care of this for me? Sincerely, Edith Ryan. She hit the send button, and she sat there and waited. A few minutes later, that tone went off that there was a return message in her email box. It was one line. No problem, E. Done deal, J.R. Several days later, the phone began to ring. First, it was Carmen Fields and her husband. She said, do you have any rooms available? Everyone else in our family has plans, and so we decided we should get away together. Albert Benson called next. He sounded old over the phone. He seemed sad and lonely, Edith decided based on his voice. Then there was Leslie, who asked, can I come with Megan, my child? She shared that Megan was sad since Dad had left them last Christmas. Edith said, it'd be great for you to come. It'd be good to have some kids around for Christmas this year in the end. We'd love for you to come. Then there was other calls. At the church across the street, Olive was busy helping prepare the Christmas pageant. Her daughter had been in charge of it for years, but her husband had been transferred and they had moved to Portland. And so now Olive was in charge. And Olive came to Edith, could you please help me with the costumes for the Christmas Eve children's pageant? It was while she was helping that there was a knock at the door. She opened the door. This place is like Grand Central Station today, observed Charles. I hope to be able to get my sermon finished for tonight. Don't worry, she assured him. It's probably just Olive and Helen again. Anyways, whatever it is, I'll take care of it. You get back to your work, dear. But it wasn't Olive or Helen. Instead, Edith found a short and rather squat woman standing at the door. The woman's hair was gray and fluffy, and she appeared to be quite elderly, at least 80 or 90, she suspected. Can I help you? She asked the woman, who didn't look one bit happy to be there. I suppose you can. My friend just dropped me off here. She looked over her shoulder and she scowled. You got any room in the inn? Edith blinked. Someone dropped you off right here and you need a room? That's what I said, isn't it? You got a room or not? The old woman shifted her shabby-looking overnight bag to the other hand and sighed in clear exasperation. You're not deaf, are you? No, of course not, Edith. Open the door wider. Please come in. Well, that's better. The woman shoved the overnight bag toward Edith as if she were a bellboy. Without questioning this, Edith took the bag and led the woman over to the long oak table that she used as a registration area. Setting the bag down on the chair beside it, she wasn't quite sure what to say now. Come on! Cat got your tongue? No. Edith studied the woman. Somehow, something about her reminded Edith of Ulysses, a bulldog that had belonged to her grandfather when she was a little girl. Maybe it was the square, flat face or the loose jowls, or perhaps it was something in those intense, slightly beady eyes, but Edith never quite trusted that dog. Well then, what's the problem? Still, Edith didn't like to judge people on appearances. I'm sorry, but people usually call ahead first to get reservations. I'm just kind of caught off guard. Look, if you're booked up, tell me, and I'll get out of your hair. No, Edith said rather quickly, perhaps a bit too quickly. We do actually have an available room. Fine, I'll take it. Right, said Edith, still trying to grasp what was going on. This guest turned out to be Myrtle. She was somewhat of an intrusion, from coming down before the 7 o'clock posted breakfast time and barging into the kitchen that had a sign that said, "Do not enter," and expecting to be fed, to butting into the lives of every other single guest who showed up at the Shepherd's Inn. Myrtle was invited over to church. And when she heard that there was going to be a Christmas pageant, she decided that she was going to help Olive make the Christmas pageant a success. The inn began to fill up. The guests began to arrive. There was a bustle around the inn, almost enough to help Edith forget that this would be the first Christmas without any of their children or any of their family home. There wouldn't be any grandchildren there this year. And after all of the guests began to arrive, the snow began to fall, and it was beginning to feel like Christmas. They were all gathered inside when there was a knock at the door. "Who could this be at this hour?" asked Edith. "We'll find out soon," said Charles as he went to open the door. A blast of chilly winter air mixed with snow burst in, and there on the porch stood a young couple. Edith blinked as she looked over Charles' shoulder to see them. These people looked as though they'd stepped right out of time. The tall, narrow-faced man had long brown hair and a full beard, and the shoulders of his dark woolen coat were dusted with snow. But it was the young woman who got Edith's attention with her sad, dark eyes and a cascade of curls beneath a plaid woven scarf that was wrapped around her head. "Do you have a room for the night?" asked the young man. Charles looked at Edith and back at the couple. "I'm sorry, but the inn is full until after Christmas." The young woman nodded sadly. "I told you they'd be full up, Colin." "Why don't you come in?" Charles suggested. "That way we can close the door and keep the heat inside." So the couple stepped into the foyer, and shaking powdery snow from their clothes, they looked around the inn and seemed impressed. "This is a nice place you've got. It's so pretty." "Where are you two from?" asked Charles. "Montana," said the woman. "We're heading to California." "California," echoed Edith. "Aren't you a little off course?" The woman made half smile. "Well, Colin picked the straightest route going west. Then we plan to head due south to San Diego, where his brother lives. But we're having some engine troubles," explained Colin. "And then the weather hit, and it's a real blizzard out there. So we thought we'd treat ourselves to a room for just one night, just to get cleaned up, you know. But that's okay. We're pretty low on funds anyway. We can stay on our bus." "Your bus?" queried Charles. Colin nodded toward the big picture window that looked out over the street. "Yeah, it's all set up to live in with a bed and everything. Not the Ritz or anything, but comfy enough." Edith went to peer out onto the street, but all she could see was darkness and snow flurries. "Do you mind if we leave it parked there?" asked the woman. "On the street, I mean, just for the night, you know." "Or until I have some time to tweak the engine a little bit," Colin added. "It's running pretty badly right now." Charles looked at Edith, and she shrugged. "I don't see that it's a problem." "You wouldn't think so," said Charles. "Not just for one night. Do you need anything, food or anything?" The young woman's eyes lit up. "We're low on water, and hey, if you want to share some food, that'd be cool. We're pretty broke. We're just trying to get to San Diego so that Colin can find work, you know." come on into the kitchen," Edith said, forgetting her sign above the door again. "We've got some leftovers from dinner that you can have if you like. By the way, my name is Edith. My husband's name is Charles." "I'm sorry. We didn't even introduce ourselves. I'm Amy, and that's Colin." In the brighter light of the kitchen, Edith could see that Amy was quite young, perhaps early 20s at the most, and she appeared to be quite pregnant. "You're expecting?" said Edith as she put the bean soup into the microwave to heat it. "Yeah. My due date is actually the first week of January, but my back's been aching, and I feel as big as a house right now. I wouldn't mind if the baby came tonight." "Tonight? But what would you do? The hospital's nearly an hour away, and that's in good weather." "Oh, I plan to have it naturally, at home. Or in the bus." "Really?" Edith wrapped a generous chunk of cornbread in plastic wrap and put it into a grocery sack along with several pieces of fruit. The next day, Myrtle was up nice and early. "What's that?" "What's what?" "That thing," pointing out the window. "The bus. It's a hippie bus. It looks like it's right out of the 60s. The bus became quite the talk of the town. It even garnered a call to Edith from the mayor, reminding her that that bus wasn't allowed to stay on the city streets. This was Christmas Village, and it was Christmas. It didn't really look very good out there on the street. Appearances are very important, in Christmas Village. Yet with the bus acting up and shot tires, Colin couldn't drive it over the mountains in the snow to San Diego. Edith had invited Colin and Amy for breakfast, and they poured out their problems and what was going on in their lives. Edith offered to have Charles take a look at the bus. He had a little bit of a mechanical knack. Charles took time out of his sermon preparation for Wednesday Advent service and looked and discovered that many repairs were needed. Colin and Amy couldn't afford the repairs. So he called an emergency board meeting that night after church so that they could decide if they could, from the church's treasury, help this young couple get their bus running and on their way. At the meeting, Olive asked, "Why should we help them? They don't even live here." "That's right," added Helen. "If we're going to help someone, why not start in our own town? We have young families who are struggling to make ends meet right here in Christmas Valley, and they're just as needy as those bus people." "I don't know about that," said Peter Simpson, the youngest member of the board. "We don't have anyone in town who's actually living in a bus." "Who lives in a bus?" demanded Olive. "For all we know, these people could be drug dealers. They do have that sort of look about them. Maybe we should let the law intervene. They would be better suited to handle something like this." And on they went, back and forth, getting nowhere fast. As was her custom, Edith sat there during the meeting and just listened. Until finally she did something she'd never done before. "May I say something?" she asked. The room got quiet. Everybody looked at her. "Go right ahead, Edith," said Hal, who was chair of the meeting. She stood up feeling slightly lightheaded and more than a little self-conscious, unsure if she could even speak. Speaking in front of a group, even a small one as this, had never been her strong suit. She hoped she was really up to the task. "I understand your concerns about our visitors. And I realize your accommodations are a bit, well, shall I say, unconventional." There was a few snickers around the room. "But as I was sitting in church tonight, I was remembering what Charles had preached on last week about showing kindness and hospitality to strangers and how sometimes we might be entertaining angels or our Lord without even knowing it. And as I was looking at this young couple, Colin and Amy, it occurred to me that they're in very similar straits to another couple. It occurred to me that more than 2,000 years ago, Mary and Joseph were strangers in town too. They were looking for a place to stay. And well, I thought perhaps this is the Lord's doing. Perhaps he sent Colin and Amy to remind us of something. Or maybe it's simply our opportunity to show kindness and hospitality. Or she lowered her voice now, almost afraid to actually put to words what was really on her mind. Or is it possible that they might be angels or even our Lord himself in disguise? How could we ever know this for sure? But even if that's not the case, do you think that our Lord would want us to open our hearts to them, to welcome them as they were sent down from heaven? Now the room grew silent, and Edith, with nothing more to say, was almost afraid to breathe. "Oh, that's ridiculous," said Olive finally. "They're obviously not angels." "Of course not," agreed Helen. "And the Lord?" She shook her head. "Arriving in a hideous bus?" "And yet," said Helen, "and yet, I think I'm starting to see this point." And just like that, the attitude in the room began to shift and transform until not only was the board willing to pay for all the mechanical expenses and new tires, but Helen was talking about giving an impromptu baby shower for Amy. In the meantime, Myrtle continued her antics. She kept interfering with the plans for the Christmas pageant. Myrtle invited herself into the lives of each one of the different guests that were there in the inn. She put pressure on Albert, the older gentleman, who was a widower for his first Christmas, to give him a ride. She had dinner with Leslie and Megan. Remember, Megan's dad had taken off the Christmas before. She hijacked Michael from Lauren, and while Lauren was back, it was revealed that the week before they had received news that Michael had an untreatable cancer diagnosis, and they had decided not to be with Christmas with their family because they thought it would ruin everybody else's Christmas. And so they had come to the inn pretending they had no family. Myrtle continued to intrude into the lives of the hosts. She tripped on a step in the stairs leading upstairs, which necessitated a handyman come and repair it. And at church, she decided that the Christmas pageant, get this, wouldn't be a real pageant without live animals. And she got one of the guests to drive her out and find a farm where they could get live animals, much to Olive's upset. There should be no live animals on the carpet in the church, you know. She even invited the farmer and his kids to Christmas Eve. She went and got flyers printed and distributed around the town, announcing that there would be a nativity at the church with live animals, so they couldn't cancel the live animals anymore. And it was the most glorious Christmas pageant on Christmas Eve that they had ever experienced in Christmas Village. And then came Christmas Day, when Myrtle didn't come down for breakfast. Suddenly there was a panic when they finally checked into her room, where they found this. To the innkeepers, Edith wrote. There, in juvenile-looking handwriting, "Thanks for your hospitality. You've got a nice place here. Sorry I couldn't stick around to say goodbye, but it's time for me to go. Colin and Amy can use my room now that I'm gone. I've paid for one more week up front, and the money is enclosed for any extra days or in case they need gas money. I know that you'll take care of it for me. Sincerely, Myrtle." "She's really gone," Edith said, looking around the room. "I was prepared to have her around for another week." But Charles just shook his head. "But how did she leave? She had no car. Did you see anyone come to pick her up last night?" "No." "Do you think somebody might have picked her up after the Christmas pageant? There were so many people there. Is it possible she arranged to be quietly picked up, and we just didn't notice?" "I suppose." And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Whether we are gathering singly or gathering with family, whether we're gathering with friends, this day is about the incarnation. One of the things I've experienced time and time again is that God comes to us time and time again through the most unlikely of places and the most unlikely of people. And the good news of God's gift of Jesus is that we're transformed.